Just across the river there, over my left shoulder, is Newcastle's West End, and for about 100 years or so, it was part of the beating heart of the UK's industrial revolution. From about the mid-1800s or so, on this 3-mile stretch of river, you had the Elsick Works and the Vickers Armstrong Works, heavy industrial factories making all sorts of things like cranes and planes and ships and tanks and ordnance and armament and everything in between. This whole area was a hard, dirty, dusty area that had tens of thousands of workers and families working there and living there in tightly packed, squalid Victorian terraced houses all the way along the west bank of Newcastle's West End there, but it's all gone. In fact, if you look at that area now, you wouldn't even know that history existed. So in this video, we're going to take a closer look at the rise and fall of Newcastle's West End. It's coming up. Welcome back, it's Eddie here from Tyneside Life. So this is a new series of videos I'm doing about Newcastle and the general Tyneside area. I'm going to be looking at the past, the present, the good, the bad, the ugly, and no nonsense, honest and gritty look at the area in which I live. If that appeals to you, make sure you hit that subscribe button and hit the bell, so every time I release a new video like this, you'll get an instant notification. So in this video, like I say, we're going to be concentrating and focusing on Newcastle's West End, this 3-mile stretch of river which includes Elsick, Benwell and Scotswood at the far end, or locally referred to as Scotchy. And if you look at the area now, it's absolutely nothing to look at. There's nothing that jumps out to be immediately interesting. On the banks of on the Tyne there in the West End, there are new business parks which have been sprouting up, but it wasn't always like that. So in order to understand this area over here, and I'm going to be going into this area, we need to understand its gritty past. So in order to understand the River Tyne's transformation into an industrial and engineering empire, we need to go back to the very beginning and talk about this man behind my right shoulder. That's Lord William G. Armstrong, and he was instrumental in changing the landscape of Newcastle's West End. Born in 1810, a Geordie lad from Newcastle, born in Shieldfield, the son of a prosperous coal merchant. He himself became a lawyer and then turned his hand into being a bit of an entrepreneur, a philanthropist and an inventor. In the mid-1800s, he set up his own engineering business. He had a flair for hydraulics, and with the help of some of his rich pals, he bought 5.5 acres of land next to where the Newcastle Utilita Arena is now, and he turned that site into a factory that began making cranes initially to load and unload ships. And over the next few years, Lord Armstrong began to branch out into other areas of industry and engineering in terms of building bridges and getting into munitions. And in the 1860s, he patented the Armstrong gun, a gun that was superior to any gun that had ever been built on naval ships. And it's in 1866 that William Armstrong come to an agreement with Mitchell's, who had a naval yard in Lower Walker, who were already building ships. So for a period of years, Elsick Works would build the guns and Mitchell's would build the ships. Now, around 25 years or so after William G. Armstrong built his first factory in Elsick, about a mile down the river there, and his empire started to expand and grow, he realised he had a massive problem because the old Georgian brick bridge that was behind me here with the 9 arches was too low to facilitate the passing of larger boats and ships up and down the Tyne. There was only one thing for it: replace the bridge. So he did. So he designed and built the swing bridge behind me here, the red and white one, a first of its kind, works on hydraulics and can rotate 90 degrees to allow ships to pass up and down. Now, interestingly about the swing bridge, at either end it has the original stone arches from the Georgian bridge. You might not know that, but also as well where the swing bridge is now, that's the original site of the first ever Tyne Bridge that was built by the Romans in about 120 AD. Having built his own shipyards in Elsick in 1884, William Armstrong and his companies would go on to build around 90 naval vessels over the next 30 years, including battleships and submarines. Some of those ships he built for one of his best customers, which was Japan, but he also built ships for China and Argentina, Brazil, Chile and Turkey. Lord Armstrong would become known as the inventor of modern artillery, and as his industrial empire spread west along the River Tyne, in 1899 he opened up another munitions factory called Vickers, which would later merge with another company called Armstrong. and it would go on to famously make tanks, eventually making the Challenger 2 tank. And during these times, people worked hard, people were poor, life was brutal, but there was a strong sense of community back then, a huge sense of local pride. People stuck together, they looked out for each other.
Well, Scotswood Road is Scotswood Road, and it's just a feeling, a togetherness, a friendliness, a pals.
As soon as you see the west end of Newcastle, people turn their nose up sort of style. It's I wouldn't say that people in this area that's given the place a bad reputation.
If you're from the area, you'll probably recognise this dual carriageway that runs behind me here for about 2.5–3 miles or so. It's one of the main arterial routes through Newcastle's West End, runs parallel to the River Tyne. Of course, it's Scotswood Road. Even if you don't recognise the place, you might have heard of Scotswood Road in a famous Geordie song called the Blaydon Races. Now, back in the day, decades ago, when we had the factories here and the terraced houses, this place looked completely different to what it does now. And in its heyday, there was approximately 45 pubs running along the stretch of Scotswood Road here, serving the workers and families that used to belong to this area. Of course, it's all gone now, which is really sad, but let's take a look at what it used to look like in the past.
I went to Blaydon Races, 'twas on the 9th of June, 1862 on a summer's afternoon. I took a bus from Bamburgh's and she was heavy laden. Away we went along Collingwood Street, that's on the road to Blaydon. Oh, me lads, you should have seen us ganning, passing the folk upon the road just as they were standing. There were lots of lads and lasses there, all with smiling faces, ganning along the Scotswood Road to see the Blaydon Races. We flew past Armstrong's factory, right up to the Robin Adair. Just ganning down to the railway bridge, the bus wheel flew off there. The lasses lost their crinolines and the veils that hid their faces. I got 2 black eyes and a broken nose and ganning to Blaydon Races. Oh, me lads, you should have seen us ganning, passing the folk upon the road just as they were standing. There were lots of lads and lasses there, all with smiling faces, ganning along the Scotswood Road to see the Blaydon Races.
Probably have heard with a deep sense of shock the decision of vigorous management to close down the Scotswood Works. Scotswood has played a major part in the west end of Newcastle in the industrial life of the city, providing employment for a large part of the community since the beginning of this century. We must not allow this factory to be closed for a narrow short-term consideration of profit, while ignoring the great contribution that Scotswood has made to welfare figures for countless years in the past.
For about 100 years, the Newcastle West End community, this tight-knit community, had been enjoying the spoils of all this engineering and industrial boom that had been going along on the factories down there by the River Tyne. But all that was about to change in the 1950s. Newcastle City Council had come to the conclusion that the old Victorian terraced houses were just becoming too expensive to maintain. They weren't up to the required standard anymore. The plumbing wasn't operating in any functional way that we know today. There was no central heating. So they decided that the best way for it was to pull down these Victorian terraced houses and come up with some new housing projects. One of those was the Noble Street Flats. The other was the Cruddas Park Flats. So between 1956 and 1958, Newcastle City Council began to build the Noble Street Flats, these 5-storey blocks. Collectively, we're going to house about 500 families.
And it was a canny little house, you know, different to these ones. And we're more happier there. The shoots especially, they smell terrible in the summer. You can't open your front door for the flies. And the stairs again, a terrible state. Durham prison. I called it Durham prison. Just needs a few bars up the windows.
And in 1961, Thomas Dan Smith and the rest of Newcastle City Council began the building of the 10 tower blocks in Elsick. 5 of them were going to be designated for social housing, 5 for private purchase. Unfortunately, over the years, the private investment just didn't really come, and they had to knock 5 of them back down. So out of the 5 that currently remain, 4 are for social housing, 1 of them are private ownerships. So you can just imagine the scene in the West End in Newcastle from the late 50s, the 60s, going into the 70s, these old Victorian terrace houses being pulled down, the demolition area, the slums that are generated, the type of problems, the social problems that they would have experienced, and these new builds that just weren't working. The flats were starting to experience social problems as well, as was the case with the Noble Street flats. So the whole area was becoming a real problem for Newcastle City Council. So then you go into the 1980s and the Thatcher government and the rise in unemployment and the government trying to break the unions. There was a lot of disaffected families and communities, a lot of angry youth, and there was a perfect storm starting to brew.
There have been more disturbances on Tyneside, this time in the West End of Newcastle, 10 miles from the scene of Monday night's riots on the Meadowell estate in North Shields. Derelict houses, a pub and cars were set on fire, firemen were stoned and fire engines damaged. And youths in a stolen car added to the chaos, doing stunts in front of burning buildings.
Trouble flared as darkness fell in the West End of Newcastle and crowds of youths gathered on the city's Elsick Road. A van was overturned in the middle of the road and set alight as a blaze took hold of a boarded-up pub nearby. Firemen who arrived to put out the blaze were beaten back by a crowd of around 300 youths. Many of them stood and watched as a pair of joyriders wearing ski masks arrived at the scene and performed a display of so-called hotting, doing handbrake turns in the middle of the road. Some of the bystanders continued to throw rocks and stones at the speeding vehicle as it swerved backwards and forwards, narrowly missing some members of the crowd.
Through the 90s, streets were still being pulled down, investment just wasn't coming, and communities were still being broken up and torn apart. So today, what is the West End in Newcastle like? Well, take a look and you can come up with your own conclusions. So what's life like now? Well, here I stand today in Scotswood, and it's an area of contrast from where I can see. You can see the old mixed with the new, you can see the poverty, you can see the signs of antisocial behaviour, but you can also see the new builds which are shooting up on the banks of the Tyne here. These new houses with terraces and patios running east to west parallel to the river, as opposed to the old terrace houses which were running north to south down the bank. I don't know what the reason is behind that. But yeah, really fascinating area, Newcastle West End. The rise and fall. Hopefully we're seeing the very beginnings of a rise again, where these new builds are going to bring in new families, build new communities. Who knows? If you're from the area, drop us a comment below and let me know what you think about Newcastle's West End, what it's like in real life, day to day. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to give us a thumbs up. Till next time, catch you later.
Ganning along the Scotswood Road to see the Blaydon Races.